She went out for a peaceful walk. What happened next shook the entire nation. Stay till the end to witness the truth, because silence is no longer an option. Like, share, and subscribe for more stories that matter. The air was crisp, the kind that carried the scent of damp leaves and hinted at the coming chill of winter. Golden sunlight filtered through a canopy of rustling oak branches that lined the sidewalks of Oak Haven Drive, one of the most affluent streets in Chevy Chase, Maryland. Birds chirped lazily. Dogs barked from behind tall white fences, and the hum of leaf blowers echoed in the distance. It was a postcard-perfect afternoon. Quiet, calm, and seemingly untouched by the chaos of the outside world. Walking steadily along the cobblestone sidewalk was a tall black woman in her early 50s. Her stride was relaxed but purposeful, her presence calm yet commanding. She wore a plain gray tracksuit with no logos, no insignias, nothing to distinguish her from the countless others who walked these streets. Her black New Balance running shoes were slightly worn, clearly favored for comfort over appearance. A hood from her sweatshirt was pulled loosely over her head, not to hide, but to keep the breeze off her ears. Wireless earbuds rested in her ears, streaming a podcast about naval warfare and maritime strategy. This woman was Rear Admiral Adelaida Ada Brooks, one of the highest-ranking officers in the United States Navy. She was not just a symbol of military excellence, but a strategist whose judgment was sought in both wartime scenarios and global peacekeeping missions. She had spent the last 8 months commanding a carrier strike group deployed in the Indo-Pacific, participating in high-stakes operations alongside allies and navigating geopolitical flashpoints with steely resolve. But none of that mattered now. None of it showed in her appearance as she peacefully strolled the neighborhood she had called home for over a decade. For Ada, this day was sacred. These walks were her reset, her reminder of life outside the command deck and briefing rooms. The smell of wet earth and oaks, the sight of children cycling down the block, and the familiar creak of garden gates brought her peace. To any passerby, she was simply a middle-aged woman on her daily walk. That anonymity was, in a way, her rarest luxury. She was nearly done with her usual route. Just a few hundred feet away, the brick gate of her home was visible beyond the bend. Her mind drifted toward the quiet cup of tea she'd planned to have in her garden. She reached up to adjust her earpiece and was about to pick up her pace when a screech of tires shattered the serenity. A black and white Ford Interceptor patrol car tore around the corner and abruptly braked beside her, the wheels grinding sharply against the asphalt. The suddenness of it made her instinctively take a step back. Doors flew open on both sides, and 2 white officers in Montgomery County police uniforms emerged with intensity in their eyes. "Hey, you! Stop right there! Don't move!" shouted the driver, a lanky young man with pale skin and barely any stubble on his chin. His name tag read T. Peterson. His partner, M. Miller, was stockier, with a square jaw and narrowed eyes that scanned Ada with suspicion before she had even said a word. Ada removed her earbuds calmly. "Is something wrong, officers?" she asked, her voice smooth, measured, and entirely unthreatening. Peterson didn't respond. Instead, he walked toward her as Miller circled slightly behind, a tactic used more often for controlling suspects than questioning pedestrians. "We got a report of a suspicious person loitering in the area," Miller said with cold authority, "matching your description. Watching homes, possible break-in planning." "Loitering?" Ada raised a brow, surprised but keeping her tone polite. "I live here. I'm just finishing my walk." Peterson's eyes narrowed. "Oh, yeah? Where exactly do you live?" "Number 12 Oak Haven Road," she answered, nodding toward the house visible just down the road. Miller's scoff was loud and intentionally theatrical. "You live there?" he repeated with a sneer. "Really? You sure you're not a housekeeper? A gardener, maybe? Because a woman like you walking around this neighborhood—" He trailed off, his meaning clear. Ada's face didn't flinch. She had endured worse than this. In war zones, at international negotiations, in rooms filled with men who assumed authority looked different than her. But what she felt now wasn't the icy cold of battlefield detachment. It was fire. A slow-burning insult that settled in her gut. "Officers," she said carefully, "I don't think it's appropriate or professional to make assumptions based on appearances. I'm willing to show you identification to confirm my residence." Peterson stepped closer, now only a few feet away. "We don't need a lecture on professionalism, ma'am. You match a report, that gives us the right to question you. And right now, you're acting suspicious as hell." "I'm not resisting, I'm not fleeing, I'm simply explaining." "Shut it," Miller snapped, advancing with his hand near his holster. "We ask the questions here. Do you have a criminal record? Any drugs or weapons on you? Speak clearly." Ada's patience tightened into a cold line across her face. "I have no obligation to answer accusatory questions without cause. Nor should I be spoken to like a suspect when I've committed no crime." "Is that so?" Miller growled. "You think you can give orders now?" Peterson's eyes glimmered with some mix of fear and bravado. "Let's see how cooperative you are when you're on the ground." Without warning, Miller shoved her hard in the chest. Ada stumbled, her footing momentarily lost on the uneven stone. Her years of physical training helped her stay upright, but the insult was deep and immediate. "What the hell are you doing?" she demanded, her voice still calm but edged with heat. "Back talk, huh?" Peterson barked. "On the ground. Hands where I can see them." Ada's hands were raised, but not in surrender, in warning. "You are escalating something that doesn't need to be too late." Miller lunged, grabbing her arm and twisting it. Peterson followed, kicking behind her knee to knock her down. She did not fight back. She could have, and easily, but she knew what that would look like. Instead, she let them force her down, face to the cold pavement, as her chest was crushed beneath a knee and her hands jerked behind her back. The metal of the handcuffs bit cruelly into her wrists. She gasped as her shoulder twisted unnaturally. She could hear neighbors murmuring from behind windows, the click of a phone camera. She lay still, breathing through the pain, as Miller leaned down and spat his next command. "Hands behind your head. Face down. Now, do you hear me, you bastard?" The cold cobblestone scraped against Ada's cheek as the pressure of Miller's knee drove into her back. Her breath came in ragged gasps, squeezed out by the crushing weight of the officer bearing down on her. Her arms were pinned behind her, and the steel cuffs bit deep into the skin at her wrists. Every small movement sent jolts of pain radiating through her shoulders and spine. But the greater pain wasn't physical. It was the humiliation, the taste of concrete dust in her mouth, the sting of being reduced from a revered leader to a presumed criminal, face down on the sidewalk of her own neighborhood. "What are you doing here?" Officer Miller snapped again, his voice dripping with contempt. "You watching houses, planning something, you waiting for your partner to show up?" Ada tried to speak, but the weight on her back made it difficult to inhale, let alone form a sentence. "I asked you a question," he shouted, slamming his knee harder into her lower back, just above the kidney. She gasped as pain flared bright behind her eyes. "I live here," she managed through gritted teeth. "This is my neighborhood." Miller leaned in, whispering near her ear. His breath smelled of sour coffee and tobacco. "Sure you do," he said mockingly, "and I'm the damn president." Officer Peterson paced nearby, his gun still drawn and aimed low, as if waiting for any excuse to use it. His eyes darted nervously between Ada and the small group of neighbors beginning to gather across the street. Phones were out. Faces filled with a mix of concern, fear, and curiosity. But no one approached. No one intervened. Ada remained still. She knew better than to fight. Her military training, years of combat readiness, of physical and mental discipline, taught her that survival often meant restraint. But even that discipline was beginning to fray beneath the growing storm of rage and helplessness. "Let's see what she's carrying," Peterson muttered. He knelt beside her and began roughly patting her down. "Do not touch me without cause," Ada said, her voice firm despite her position. "This is unlawful." "You don't get to decide what's lawful," Miller sneered. "You think wearing a hoodie and walking around here doesn't look suspicious?" Ada's body tensed at the accusation. She knew exactly what they were implying, what they were really saying. Not suspicious, not loitering. What they saw was black. What they saw was wrong. And that was enough. Peterson yanked the wireless earbuds from her ears and threw them onto the sidewalk. "You're awful chatty for someone in cuffs." Miller stood and gave her a hard shove with his boot to roll her onto her side. "Let's see your ID then. If you really live here, let's see it." "In my right jacket pocket," Ada said quietly. Peterson dug in, pulled out her wallet, and flipped it open. His face twisted when he saw the military identification card. He paused, eyes flicking up to meet Miller's. "Rear Admiral?" he said under his breath. Miller snatched the ID and stared at it for several seconds. A moment of recognition passed between them, but it didn't soften their stance. If anything, it made them defensive, angry. "You expect us to believe this is real?" Miller growled, waving the card in her face. "You bought this online or something?" Ada turned her head slightly and met his eyes for the first time. Her expression was unreadable, but her gaze was sharp, cutting. "If you think that ID is fake, then you're even more ignorant than I assumed." "Watch your mouth," Miller spat. "You think a fake rank gives you permission to disrespect officers of the law?" "I think the law doesn't give you permission to kneel on an unarmed woman's back and mock her because of her skin color," Ada replied, each word slow and deliberate. A moment of silence hung in the air. The weight of her words struck harder than any physical resistance. Peterson looked away. Miller clenched his jaw. "You're making this worse for yourself," Miller finally snapped, standing upright. "Resisting questioning, impersonating a federal officer, obstruction. I didn't resist. I didn't run. I didn't even raise my voice," she cut in. "And you're fabricating charges because you can't admit you were wrong." Across the street, more neighbors had gathered. One woman was visibly recording on her phone. A man stepped forward, hesitated, then stopped. The fear of authority, even when it was being abused, was too strong. "I suggest you call your supervisor," Ada said. "Right now, before this becomes a national scandal." Miller let out a bitter laugh. "You threatening us?" "I'm stating a fact," she said calmly. "Your actions are being filmed. This neighborhood has at least 4 exterior security cameras pointed in this direction. I know. I've lived here for 12 years. I've advised the Department of Defense on base security protocols more complex than anything your department has ever dreamed of. And I assure you, every step of what you've done is already recorded." Peterson's face blanched. "You're bluffing." "Call your supervisor and find out," she said. They stared at her. Miller shifted on his feet, clearly rattled now but not ready to surrender control. I don't care who you are, he snapped. You're not getting away with trying to intimidate us. I'm not trying, she said quietly. I don't need to. Peterson reached for his radio, casting a glance at Miller, silently asking for permission. Miller hesitated, then gave a reluctant nod. This is Unit 714 requesting supervisor on site, Peterson said into the mic, his voice noticeably less steady than before. We have a detainment situation. Female suspect. Claimed identity. Rear Admiral Adelaida Brooks, requesting verification. A crackling silence followed. Then a voice responded. Sharp, alarmed, furious. What did you just say? The voice barked. Peterson hesitated. Suspect identified herself as Rear Admiral Adelaida Brooks, Navy. The voice exploded through the speaker. Are you out of your goddamn mind, Peterson? Brooks, from Joint Command, do not touch her again. Don't speak to her. Stay right where you are. I'm en route. Peterson turned pale. Miller took a step back as if he'd been struck. The name had landed like a grenade. Ada lay still on the ground, breathing through the pain, watching them with icy calm. Now, she said, would one of you please remove these handcuffs before things get even worse for both of you? They didn't move. Their hands twitched at their belts, their faces slack with fear and disbelief. The silence was deafening. The real weight of what they had done was only just beginning to settle in. The radio still crackled in Peterson's trembling hand as the weight of the commander's furious voice echoed in the air, bouncing off the oak trees and stuccoed mansions lining Oak Haven Drive. Don't touch her again. Don't speak to her. Stay where you are. I'm en route. The words hit like thunder. Peterson slowly lowered the radio. His face, moments ago flushed with authority and aggression, had turned a sickly white. His lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Beside him, Miller looked as if someone had pulled the ground from under his feet. The confidence that had fueled his earlier mockery and violence evaporated in an instant. What remained was uncertainty and fear. Ada lay on the pavement in silence, her breath now slow, controlled. Her arms still ached in the tight cuffs, her jaw was sore where her face had pressed against the cold stone, but her voice, when it came, was as calm and firm as ever. Now, she said, do you finally understand the weight of what you've done? Neither officer answered. Peterson's mouth twitched as though he wanted to speak but was too afraid of saying the wrong thing. Miller stood rooted, his jaw clenched, hands curled into fists. The sheer force of his humiliation was beginning to sink in. He had manhandled someone he believed was disposable. Now, reality was cracking that illusion wide open. I gave you my identification. I gave you my address. I cooperated fully. Ada continued, her voice sharpening, taking on the tone of a seasoned commander in a combat briefing. And you responded with violence, racial slurs, and unlawful force. She paused, her gaze lifting just enough to see Peterson flinch. You still think this is a joke? No, ma'am, Peterson whispered. Ada exhaled once, a deep breath laced with pain, before continuing. You should both be aware that not only did your body cams capture everything, but so did at least 5 private home security systems on this block. This entire street is blanketed with surveillance. If you thought you could bury this, you're already too late. Miller's hands moved slightly toward his belt, but then dropped. You're threatening us. No, Ada said flatly. I'm informing you. A sudden stillness fell over the street. The neighbors had stopped murmuring. Some of them had stepped forward just slightly, curious, cautious, sensing the balance of power had shifted. In the distance, the deep, distinct roar of large engines began to roll closer. A black SUV flanked by 2 patrol cars came into view, red and blue lights flashing silently. Tires screeched as they braked to a halt. Doors flew open. The first man out of the SUV was a plainclothes officer, perhaps in his early 50s, with a square jaw and sharp eyes hardened by years of leadership. He moved with purpose, his coat flaring behind him, and his badge clipped to his belt, catching a glint of sunlight. Sheriff Michael Donovan. Right behind him, looking nearly as panicked as Peterson had sounded on the radio, came Lieutenant Davis, the shift supervisor, his cheeks flushed with exertion and dread. Donovan didn't even glance at the stunned officers still standing over the restrained woman on the ground. His eyes locked instantly on Ada. "Rear Admiral Brooks," he called out, voice full of horror and disbelief. "My God, what the hell happened here?" Ada turned her head slowly, fixing him with a gaze that was neither warm nor forgiving. "Ask your men," she said coolly, "or better yet, review their footage." Donovan swore under his breath and gestured urgently to Davis. "Get those cuffs off her, now." Davis snapped to action, fumbling slightly with the keys as he approached. His hands were shaking. When the cuffs finally clicked open, Ada slowly pushed herself into a sitting position with a quiet wince. She said nothing as Donovan himself stepped forward and helped her gently to her feet. "Are you hurt?" he asked quickly. "Do you need medical—" "I'll live," she cut in. "But that's not the point, is it?" Donovan swallowed hard. No, it's not." She brushed the dirt and leaves from her tracksuit herself, slow and methodical. The silence was suffocating. Across the street, neighbors stood stunned, watching this extraordinary scene unfold. The 2 patrol officers frozen like statues, the sheriff visibly sweating, the handcuffed woman now standing tall, unbroken, with authority radiating from her even through exhaustion. Ada turned slowly and faced the 2 officers who had attacked her. "These men," she said, her voice louder now, commanding the full attention of the entire street, "have not only acted with blatant unprofessionalism. They have demonstrated what can only be described as overt, aggressive racism. They did not see me as a citizen. They did not see me as a woman. They saw me as a threat because of the color of my skin." Her eyes landed squarely on Miller, who dropped his gaze in shame. "They shoved me, handcuffed me, pressed a knee into my back, mocked my identity, all while I was doing nothing but walking home on my own street." Donovan looked like he was about to be sick. "Admiral Brooks," he said, his voice lower now, "I cannot express how ashamed I am. I take full responsibility. You have every right to demand answers and consequences." "I will," Ada said. "I expect not just consequences. I expect action." Donovan turned sharply to Davis. "Lieutenant, disarm both officers, effective immediately. Suspend them without pay, pending full internal investigation. Prepare a referral to the federal prosecutor's office for civil rights violations and use of excessive force." Davis nodded and quickly moved to obey. Peterson and Miller didn't protest. They didn't speak. They just stood there, pale, sweating, the realization of the gravity of their mistake finally dawning on them in full. 2 detectives from the arriving units approached and took their weapons, badges, and body cameras. Miller blinked rapidly, his jaw twitching. Peterson looked like he might be sick. Donovan turned back to Ada. "Ma'am, Admiral, once again, I can only say how deeply sorry I am for this disgraceful event." She looked at him hard. "I don't want your apologies, Sheriff," she said. "I want answers, and I want reform. I've lived here for 12 years. I pay taxes, I walk these streets, and if someone like me, with rank, with decades of service, can be assaulted in broad daylight by your officers, what happens to those who don't wear a uniform? What happens to the kids on the next block who don't have a title to shield them? Donovan lowered his head. You're right. We failed. I will do everything in my power to make this right. Not just for you, for this entire community. Ada glanced once more at the crowd of onlookers. Good, she said, because I'm not going anywhere, and I'll be watching. She turned and began walking slowly back toward her home, each step heavy but deliberate. She didn't need a dramatic exit. Her presence alone, her survival of the humiliation with dignity and tact, spoke louder than anything else could. Behind her, silence fell again, deep and uneasy. But something had shifted in the air. Something had broken, and something new had just begun. Less than 4 minutes after Rear Admiral Adelaida Brooks began walking away from the scene, another wave of urgency swept through the neighborhood. A second, black SUV, darker than the first and lacking any police markings, roared down Oak Haven Drive with the speed and precision of a motorcade. 2 more patrol cars flanked it, sirens silent, but lights blazing red and blue like fire licking at the edges of calm. The SUV braked sharply near the curb where it had all happened, where Ada had been pinned, handcuffed, and humiliated. Doors opened immediately. From the rear seat emerged a tall man in a perfectly tailored gray suit, his expression hard and unreadable. Behind him, a security aide followed, speaking quickly into a wireless headset. But it was the man in front who drew gasps from a few of the onlookers. Brigadier General Carlos Nguyen, liaison from the Joint Chiefs and Department of Defense. He wasn't just a man of rank. He was a signal. His presence meant this had traveled far beyond the jurisdiction of Montgomery County. This was now a national matter. Sheriff Donovan stepped forward to greet him, but the general didn't shake his hand. His voice was sharp, clipped, and loud enough for all to hear. I've come on direct order from the Pentagon. Is Rear Admiral Brooks safe and secure? Donovan nodded quickly. She is. She's at home, physically unharmed, though... He trailed off, ashamed. Nguyen didn't wait for the rest. Where are the officers responsible? Donovan gestured to a nearby patrol car where Officers Peterson and Miller sat in the back, heads bowed low, cuffed and stripped of all equipment. Their faces were pale, sweaty, and blank. Whatever bravado they'd had earlier had been utterly consumed by the weight of reality. They've been disarmed and suspended pending a full criminal investigation. I've already initiated contact with the U.S. Attorney's Office, Donovan said. Good. Make sure the federal civil rights team is looped in. The Department of the Navy will be watching every step. General Nguyen replied. He turned slowly, surveying the scene, still lined with neighbors, still buzzing with a quiet, stunned energy. And make sure the media gets the truth. All of it. Not one word spun. Yes, sir, Donovan murmured. Across the street, phones were still pointed. Footage from minutes ago had likely already begun circulating on social media. Footage of 2 white officers pinning an unarmed black woman to the ground and calling her a threat. But now that woman had a name, a rank, a history that couldn't be dismissed. Inside her home, just a few doors away, Ada sat in the quiet of her study, a mug of untouched tea resting on the table beside her. Her hands were clean now, her sleeves rolled up, but her shoulders still carried the weight of what had just unfolded. She had changed out of her dirtied tracksuit into a crisp navy blue blouse. Her posture remained perfect. Her expression, calm but unreadable. A soft knock sounded at the front door. Her housekeeper, Mrs. Aranda, opened it cautiously and peeked through. "Admiral," she called softly, "they're here again." Ada nodded. "Let them in." General Nguyen entered first, offering a respectful nod. "Admiral Brooks." "Carlos," she said in reply, rising to greet him. "I wish we were meeting under better circumstances." "So do I." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. The Joint Chiefs were informed within 30 minutes. "The White House has been briefed. This won't be swept under any rug." "I'm not worried about rugs," Ada replied. "I'm worried about those officers getting quietly transferred to a rural post and doing this again to someone without stars on their shoulder." Nguyen gave a grim nod. "It won't happen. There's going to be hell to pay." Ada's eyes locked onto his. "Then make sure that hell starts now." Outside, Sheriff Donovan approached a gathering of press who had begun to arrive. Small local outlets at first, but more national vans were turning down the street. Microphones were shoved forward. Cameras clicked. "Sheriff Donovan, can you confirm the identity of the woman detained earlier today?" "Yes," he said, his voice steady despite the sweat on his brow. "Rear Admiral Adelaida Brooks, United States Navy." Gasps. The press murmured in disbelief. "And was she suspected of a crime?" "No," Donovan said plainly. "She was out for a walk in her own neighborhood. The incident was a result of unlawful detainment, use of excessive force, and racial bias by 2 of my officers." One reporter cut in. "Will they be charged?" "They have been suspended without pay, and the matter is under federal review," Donovan answered. "I have personally requested an investigation by the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, and I have committed to full cooperation." Meanwhile, at Ada's home, Nguyen sat down across from her. "What would you like to happen next?" "I want their careers over," Ada said without blinking. "And not just for me. I want a message sent to every department in this country. This isn't just poor training. It's a sickness. A sickness rooted in bias, superiority, and unchecked power. You'll have full military legal backing. Civilian support too," Nguyen assured her. "The Navy is with you." Ada nodded but remained firm. "Good, because I don't intend to let this die quietly. I won't be anyone's symbol. I will be their reckoning." As dusk began to settle over Oak Haven Drive, neighbors stood outside in small clusters, whispering about what they had witnessed. A few younger residents had tears in their eyes. Others looked away in guilt, but no one forgot what had happened. Peterson and Miller were transported away shortly after, silent in the back of a black federal vehicle. They were no longer officers, no longer safe behind their badges. Now they were defendants in a story the whole nation would soon be reading. Inside her home, Ada stood at the window and watched them go. Her arms were crossed, her shoulders still stiff, but in her eyes burned a quiet fire, controlled, disciplined, but no less fierce than the woman who had once stood on the deck of a warship and commanded fleets. She knew this wasn't over. This was only the beginning. The headlines broke less than 24 hours after the incident. Decorated Rear Admiral assaulted by police in her own neighborhood. Montgomery County officers detain high-ranking Navy official in mistaken identity incident. Racism in plain sight. How a black woman in uniform was thrown to the pavement. The images spread like wildfire. Rear Admiral Adelaida Brooks, lying face down on the sidewalk, restrained, with an officer's knee digging into her back. Another photo showed her standing up free, eyes piercing through the officers as they were led away. Video clips from home security systems, Body cams and smartphones were compiled into montages that played on every major news network. The reaction was swift, loud, and widespread. Prominent military officials issued statements of support. Members of Congress called for hearings. Advocacy groups demanded systemic reform. On social media, her name trended for days. She became a symbol overnight, not because she asked to be, but because her experience had torn the mask off, a sickness too many had tried to deny. Yet for Ada, there was no victory in the attention. She didn't care about the interviews or the news cycles. Her concern wasn't the noise. It was the silence that always followed after. The silence when the world moved on, and the systems that allowed this kind of abuse to happen simply returned to their routines. But not this time. Not under her watch. In the days that followed, Ada was invited to speak at multiple events, at the Pentagon, at universities, and on Capitol Hill. But she refused all of them except one, a closed-door hearing at the House Armed Services Committee, where she laid out in unflinching detail everything that had happened. No euphemisms, no polished summaries. She described the way Officer Miller had sneered when he suggested she was a housekeeper. She described how Peterson's voice cracked in panic only after he realized who she was. She described the pain of metal cuffs cutting into her wrists and the weight of a boot pressing her dignity into the concrete. And then she asked the committee, "If I, Adelaida Brooks, Rear Admiral of the United States Navy, can be treated like this in broad daylight, then what happens to the women with no title? To the young men with no one watching? To the countless names we never hear, never record, never remember?" The silence that followed was not routine. It was the sound of responsibility finally catching up to power. Officers Peterson and Miller were officially terminated within a week. The Justice Department brought formal charges against both: assault, false arrest, civil rights violations, and abuse of authority. They appeared in court with pale faces and subdued lawyers. For once, there were no defenses to hide behind. The Montgomery County Police Department underwent a top-down investigation, resulting in sweeping reforms. These included mandatory racial bias training for all officers, a new independent civilian oversight board with disciplinary authority, a recruitment overhaul focusing on psychological screening and community representation, body camera footage to be released to the public within 72 hours in cases involving force. The sheriff, Michael Donovan, remained in his position, but only after Ada personally approved his detailed plan for long-term reform, and only after he stood beside her at a press conference and admitted, "We failed, and failure has consequences." But change was not confined to Montgomery County. Within the Navy, Ada launched an internal initiative to address bias within the military ranks as well, one that included peer accountability programs, leadership training with a zero-tolerance approach to discrimination, and direct communication with civilian law enforcement liaisons in every major base across the country. She named the program Initiative ECHO, a reference to how injustice echoes across institutions when unchallenged. And it wasn't just policy, it was personal. Ada spoke to junior officers, especially women of color, about knowing their worth, knowing their rights, and knowing that silence in the face of injustice was not professionalism. It was complicity. She knew that some would accuse her of making it political, but she didn't care. She wasn't interested in politics. She was interested in justice. Weeks later, on a quieter afternoon, she sat once again in her garden. The oak trees rustled. The sun filtered down gently. Her mug of tea, this time warm, rested in her hand. Mrs. Aranda stepped out onto the patio and handed her a letter. "It's from the governor's office," she said quietly. Ada opened it and read the short note. It was a formal commendation, an apology, and an invitation to co-chair a new statewide task force on law enforcement reform. She folded the letter neatly and placed it beside her. Then she stood, walked to the edge of her lawn, and looked down Oak Haven Drive, the same path she had walked when everything had unraveled. She didn't flinch. She didn't mourn. She simply said quietly to herself, "They will not forget," because she would not let them, because silence this time would not return, because dignity, once stolen, must be reclaimed with truth, fire, and fearless clarity. And because the next time a black woman walks down that street, or any street in America, she must not have to carry her worth like a shield. She must be free. One story, one voice, but countless lives impacted. If this moved you, don't stay silent. Help others hear it too, like comment and subscribe for more powerful stories.